them.
Staying with that synchronicity aspect, how does that differ for an individual sport? So someone who's playing golf or tennis, because it makes total sense with a team. So like those 11 brains working together obviously creates momentum when they're in sync. But what does it look like in an individual athlete when they are either creating and sustaining momentum or they're losing momentum to their opponent?
So with an individual, I think it really plays down into the basic cognitive level of what you're trying to accomplish and where your thoughts are aligned. I'm not quite sure where what research article I'd found it on, but I ask frequently how many thoughts people think that they have on average in a day. And people throw out answers all over the place. Like, oh, we got 1,000, we got 10,000, we got 1,000,000 thoughts a day, that people have on average. Except Fred over there, he gets about 3. Fred always gets ribbed, by their buddies, and like he doesn't think very much. But in general, there was a study that came out of the University of Southern California's neuro imaging lab, and they found that on average, people have about 70,000 thoughts a day. And I always break that down to, I think it comes down to like 49 thoughts per minute. And I go, well, that's about a thought per second. And clearly you have some more than others. If it's a really high stress moment, you're going to be trying to pull in information from wherever you can get it. But if it's a downtime and you can like really become more mindful and you can like reduce and direct your thoughts, you're going to have fewer. So the individual is trying to juggle all of those components and variables at the same time. And the more that are outliers and can trip you up, the less likely you are to remain synchronous and to be able to create and control those opportunities for momentum swings.
Yeah, it makes sense that if you're going to be having a thought per second, so let's just say 60 thoughts per minute, if they are all over the place, where there's some positive, some negative, some effective for performance, and some ineffective, that it's going to hurt your chances of gaining and sustaining momentum, as opposed to all of those thoughts being very universal, very uniform,
Yeah.
and on the same subject.
Yeah. And that's where you can see that it can still be just as difficult for the individual, because if they're left to their own devices, now I have to focus on me. But what happens if I'm working within a team? I'm playing automatically because I've built up to a certain level of execution, but I'm really now attending my focus to my teammate. And that might minimize or control some of my thoughts in a way that is productive as well. So it's not necessarily just easier because it's only me, individual versus team, but it's really having that understanding and awareness of what you can really regulate and control, and then being able to align those and to create anything systemic enough that's going to help you produce the way that you want. Getting into a flow state is what's usually talked about in that regard.
And we're going to talk about flow state later on when we talk about a lot of different mental performance variables. Before that, I want to keep talking about momentum just a little bit. And I want to talk about the differences between short-term and long-term momentum. So this is how I think of it: as you could easily see momentum, for example, in basketball, when a team goes on a run where they score 10 points, the other team scores 0 points. That's momentum. But you can also see this throughout a series where maybe a team was down 3-1 in the series and they win 2 or 3 games in a row. And now they have this more long-term momentum. Is there anything you can speak of that would help us kind of clarify or understand the differences between these two types of momentum?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question again, Gabe. It's interesting because it can be so varied that it can be hard to peg, and everybody wants to fill in the gaps Monday morning quarterback style. And so you're trying to give the best that you can, and the greater awareness that an individual or a team has, the more you can kind of pull from them in those moments to say, tell me what was happening or what's going on. But for the most part, you can start to break down periods of momentum shifts in different ways. One of those concepts is having a spark start, is what it's called, which is something big happens. It's kind of out of the norm. And that can be a change in momentum, the direction of where things are going, for the good or the bad. The other end of that is a breaking of momentum, your opponent's momentum in a sense. You recognize that they have a direction that they're working, and you're finding a way to interrupt that and reset kind of what's going on. But you can also have what you're speaking to in terms of a gradual momentum shift. So that can also be, you know, either positive or negative. You're working towards, or it's working against you, but it draws itself out a little bit more. And so when you're talking about a micro versus macro scale, these things are always kind of occurring in a way that it's hard to say, like, well, what degree are we at? Well, we're on the macro side of the micro focus right now. You know, it's in a game, but we're looking long term because we know there's a full series versus, you know, there's just so much that can be added to that. But I think that as you start figuring out, first and foremost, well, we're here now. Are you present? What's the micro scale? What's going on in this individual game or during this period? You're starting to figure out what variables you can control and what you're doing with some of these shifts and what you are aware of happening. Is there a gradual shift? Is it going your direction? Or is it just tit for tat? You get to score, I get to score. Or do you understand when you get those breaks in momentum, those spark starts, or those you interrupt and impede what was happening in the other direction? Those things are what you start looking for on that smaller individual moment, and then you can extrapolate that. At the end of a game, you say, man, we took the first of the series. Okay, well, that allows me to breathe a little bit, or it allows me to take a different strategy or different approach. And so now I can twist my variables up a little bit more, and I can take this macro scale and start saying, all right, this is gradual. I got to win, you know, best of 4 or best of 7. I got to get the first 4. Well, I got the first one under my belt. So now gradually it's going my direction. How do I continue that process to get there when the other team is like, yo, before they get momentum and win a second one and we're really behind 0-2, how do we break this up? How do we come in and throw a wrench in the system? We're going to have to change up our strategy and our technique to make that happen because, you know, our game plan of being up 1-0, we can no longer abide by.